Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of the Bao Podcast. Today, we are joined by someone who has been working for decades at the intersection of economics, climate, and sustainability. Someone who is as comfortable navigating academic research as he is contributing to policy and real-world impact. Our guest is Steven Van Passel, professor in Environmental Economics at the University of Antwerp, and currently Vice-Rector for Valorisation and Sustainability. He leads the EnvEcon research group with over 40 researchers tackling key issues in food systems, energy, and the circular economy. Steven's work ranges from modeling the economic impact of climate change on agriculture to evaluating new technologies in the bioeconomy and contributing to panels that shape climate and nitrogen policy in Flanders. He's driven by a clear mission to inspire people to change and to guide that change through systems thinking and science-based decision-making. We're excited to talk about what valorization really means, how to translate research into societal value, and where Steven sees the most promising shifts happening in sustainable construction and energy. So, Steven, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here, and how are you doing today?
Thank you, and I'm very happy that I finally made it. And if you mention for decades, I'm starting feeling old, but that's still not the case. But nevertheless, I'm very, very happy to be here.
That's great to hear. Steven, it's quite a lot that you're tackling when I read this introduction. Can you maybe explain a little bit to the audience what the work is that you do at the University of Antwerp and how you came to work on these topics?
Okay, already different questions. Let's start with one part of my job, and that's as a research professor on environmental economics. So to be short, my background is in bioscience engineering and economics, and that combination, that's the pathway that brought me what I am today. And after my studies, I started a PhD. I studied at KU Leuven, and then I did my PhD at Ghent University. And then afterwards, I also worked at Hasselt University. And living in Antwerp, I'm quite happy that I'm now working in Antwerp, so I can come by bike as I came here today. And what I'm really doing, I'm an environmental economist. And in the end, we look to markets and we see what's not happening and where markets fail. And one of the key market failures is the fact that we have what we call externalities. And environmental externalities are things like pollution, climate change, and they are very difficult to tackle. And we really want to, and that's what we call change towards sustainability, and that's what we're doing in all our kind of research projects.
Okay. What was your PhD about?
Well, my PhD, that was it was a PhD in agricultural economics, but it was already at that time one of the first looking into the environmental concerns. I started my PhD around 2000, and it was, in fact, it was looking into the Flemish agricultural sector, and we had the concern, how can we measure farm sustainability? And even at that time, we had nitrogen issues, we had energy challenges towards renewable energy, and so on and so on. But we also saw that you have farm performance. And as an economist, we measure performance as, okay, a farm we have production factors. We are people working at the farm, and we have capital because we have to build. We have this kind of goods and animals, and so even living capital. And we want to make food. You produce food, and food, you can sell your food, and in the end, what you do is that you use your land, you use your buildings, you use your animals, and you use your labor to do something. and to produce food, mainly producing food. And in the end, and we look, historically, we say we want to do that as efficient and as good as possible. And so to, in fact, as cheap as possible with low costs. And we were innovating, and we are good in that. It's like in this region, and to make with not a lot of labor, not a lot of capital, we want to produce a lot of food. And historically, we did a tremendous job, because not our grandfathers, but probably your grandfathers, they were farmers. And 100 years ago, and certainly 200 years ago, nearly all people were farming, and they produced food. And now we have only 1% of the population, even less, and they are farming, and they produce more food than we did decades ago. So that's due to this wonderful evolution. But, and that's the but, in the end, we were seeing, and that started already in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we were seeing that we have limitations, and there was pollution, there was impact on the environment. And the idea of my PhD was, how can we measure that? And I developed indicators on sustainable value to compare farms. And because there were discussions, if a specialized farm, is that more or less sustainable than mixed farming, combining a specialized farm is only, for example, only producing milk. And this kind of discussions, they're very difficult to answer. And this was one of my contributions to see what can we do, how can we measure farm performance, including this kind of sustainability indicators at that time.
Right. I can imagine it must be quite a challenge these days to, first of all, run a farm and to do it in a profitable way. And then also to take into consideration the increasing pressures on the environment as well, and the legal framework that's being realized.
Yeah, you're right. Surprisingly, the things we were studying 20 years ago, they're still kind of, the issues still look the same. But of course, that's not completely true. The thing is, the challenges are still there. And I must say, and I'm also always a positive, like there were tremendous efforts made by farmers. So regarding sustainability, that's one thing. On the other hand, the pressure, the economic pressure in an international market is still there. And that means that if we want to be successful, and we are in certain parts, we are quite successful. I think about the potatoes, and we have the vegetables. We have also in certain factors we are producing a lot of milk, and we have in certain subsectors we are performing quite well. But in some problems are still there, and we had some new problems, of course, because in the end we see that farmers grow, and that we still have in certain regions we have issues. And 20 years ago we had issues with, for example, manure for pig farming, and we still have them today, although we were able to have technologies to treat our manure, for example. But that made that we when we have a solution, and then we create some space for new economic activity, and in that sector, especially in food producing sector and farming, we see that space is rapidly taken. And then we still hitting the kind of border, and then you can say some will say we are definitely out of range, and I if you look into numbers, you see that we still have issues on water, we still have on soil issues, and certain indicators are improving, but the majority are still at an alarming scale. So that's still the case.
How do we as a society determine what's a good range? What's a good impact?
That's one of the most difficult ones, because and then I come to my key message, because after my PhD, I also looked into energy systems. We looked to a lot of, starting from biomass linked to farming, and we go to wind and solar energy, and also other kind of technologies in circularity. And it's nearly always the same. And sustainability is a key issue in sustainability, in my opinion. It's trade-offs. And that makes it quite difficult because it's also dynamic. And you cannot, and of course there are kind of measuring schemes who say these are the planet boundaries. But to say, and it's good that this kind of research is happening, but to put those boundaries, for example, for Flanders or for Europe or for the world, it's highly difficult. But we should have them, and we should think about these boundaries, but it's dynamic. They can shift due to technology changes, but they can also be more tightened because we have new insights, and then we see this certain, and there are examples. If we, a few years ago, PFAS and PFAS, they were kind of non-issue or not discussed or not publicly discussed. And in the end, now we know, and then we can and should be more strict than we were before. So it's a dynamic happening, but in the end it's about trade-offs, and we should always decide and discuss openly and try to measure this impact, to quantify them, but also realize that you also need to discuss openly about these trade-offs, and that you cannot measure everything. And what I mean with trade-offs, and that's often the most difficult discussion, is about economic activities, the social impact, and the environmental aspects, and that's very sensitive, even more today. We should be, and then you have some kind of shifts. If we talk about sustainability today, it's completely different than we did it 5-6 years ago. And as a sustainability scientist, these are not the perfect times. But I know, and that's maybe a little bit drama, but I know that it will shift again, because we will be confronted by kind of major challenges, point pollutions regionally, but also climate change kind of impacts. And then there will be more attention, and people will, and at certain levels it will be too late, but nevertheless it's trade-offs. And try to see how, and then you can discuss, and then you should discuss and see, okay, can we do this kind of economic activity? What's the impact and what's the risk? And some people are very, very concerned, and they dislike economic activity and I do not like that. So that's clear, and that makes it also very sensitive and interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, from our perspective, where I see some really interesting conflict happening, and conflict is maybe not the right word, but like a tension building, is in the Netherlands. We have done our first couple of projects in the Netherlands, and we are now in discussion with more and more Dutch developers. And there it's the entire issue with the farms and the pollution that they create in the form of, I don't know what stickstoff is in English. Nitrogen. With almost all developers I talk to in the Netherlands, they have a couple of main issues. One of them is the construction costs, which is the same everywhere. The net congestion, like the amount of electricity that gets added to the electricity network in the Netherlands, which is completely bloated now with all the solar panels, I think. And then the last one is the nitrogen from the farms, and they're really starting to get into conflict with a society who needs more homes. They have like 1 million homes, shortage of 1 million homes, and then the building permit process that's becoming more and more difficult because of these really strict nitrogen legislations. And I think it's going to get more and more of a topic in the Netherlands with the next elections. I mean, it already is, but I don't know if you study it or follow the tension.
Yeah, we follow it. But it's exactly the same in Flanders. And in the end,
but it feels to be a little bit less of a thing.
Because we had, for the nitrogen, in the end, in the Netherlands, the pressure is a little bit higher, but it's quite similar than in Flanders on our ecosystem. And the thing is, the tension is higher because in the end, they were a little bit more careful than we are. But also there you see that this is directly the tension and the trade-offs. And then if people say, yeah, we need more homes, then we maybe should produce a little bit less intensive our food. And that means maybe a little bit more imports and this or less export. And then you get kind of this kind of discussion, and nitrogen is a very nice example of those tensions also between sectors, because we are talking now about agriculture, but in the end you also have the speed limits and nitrogen. You have different sources, and you have also industry, and you have in the nitrogen discussion the majority is from agriculture. But then the question is, farmers believe and feel like that they have to do all the work in reducing their nitrogen depositions, and these kind of discussions are kind of intriguing, but very, very difficult, because you have the science and the facts, and there's also uncertainty, and then in the end you need solutions. And there are kind of, and now I come back to the environmental economics issue, there are kind of solutions. One of the solutions is to have taxing. You can have a nitrogen tax, for example, but then you have the social component, because then it's possible you're not that competitive anymore. And then in the Netherlands, they also have had experiments with a kind of tradable permits, where you can, when you can trade, when you reduce nitrogen, you can trade that space to someone else, and they can pay for you for that. And so if a farmer can stop its activities, they can say, okay, I will trade for that. In theory, it's a beautiful, it's our, and that's because I was also in the nitrogen committee a few years ago. And that was one of the things we said, you need to investigate that and to make it happen, to have this kind of economic activity and if you put the correct price on that, you can make results that you still have this economic activity and you do something about the pressure on our environment. The thing is, if you do it in a wrong way, and there were some kind of failed experiments in the Netherlands, then by, for example, selling nitrogen space but was not realized, so that's kind of, you can see that as fraud, of course, but then people they have distrust in these kind of systems, and that makes it so difficult if you do it in a wrong way. And you see in the Netherlands also there was a kind of announcement of, okay, we will pay you to stop your farming activities, and there was a call for that, and then someone from the ministry was saying, but if you will stop in a few years, you get more money. Of course, no one will. So this kind of, we were really able to observe, and in this case, in my opinion, and often they say, in the Netherlands they are kind of front runners, but in this case, they really made themselves it was very, very, they made it very messy. But nevertheless, we still have that issue. And if we are not acting, and that's one of the things, we cannot ignore it. And if we ignore it, we will also be at a certain point that we have kind of, we need to take some measures that are more drastic. And that's again the trade-off. The trade-off is not only between economy, environment, and the social aspect, but also the trade-off is by acting now or acting in the future. And with climate, it's even more apparent, where you say, okay, who needs to invest? Who needs to, in fact, give something of her welfare back, and when? And we can say, and we can do whatever we want, and that's what currently is happening with climate change. We can keep on emitting CO2 into the atmosphere. We can, because also animal production is also with methane, and is also an issue. We can still keep on doing that, but in the end, the future generations will suffer. In fact, they are already suffering now in certain areas of the world. If we have to do nothing now, we do nothing, the price will be higher in the future. But if we pay a very high price now, we maybe also will block all initiatives and also some sort. So this is kind of the discussions, and that's the trade-off between the components and also between now and the future. And that makes it quite difficult, but we should act. And in certain cases and we know that we are not doing enough. So that scientists are clear for climate change. We can say about trade-offs between now and the future, but now is not doing enough. That's clear.
And then you have the role of technology as well.
Yeah.
Because there are certain things like, I'm no expert like at all, but you read and you listen to certain sources. And for me, something that's been really interesting to follow as an enthusiast is the exponential growth of social solar panels.
Yeah.
And that the models that were made in, I think, 10 years ago, that were aimed for like 2040 and 2045, we are already exceeding them now. And I don't know, how do you look at technology and the almost impossible way to try and guess how that's going to influence these different problems?
I look with curiosity to technology, and in the end, I like it. But also there, you also have, but I can come back to that later, you also have different kind of sustainability scientists with different views on that. So of course, I do not believe that that we will make it only with technology. And if you pinpoint to the solar panels, in the end, the technology was there, the technology developed, but it was also made possible by what we call a public push. So the push of governmental subsidies, who really, mainly in Europe, who really pushed towards the use of solar panels, and at that time, kind of paying the additional costs that was needed to make this kind of evolution possible.
Didn't Germany play a huge role in this?
Yeah, but indeed, that's one of the front runners at that time, and that's similar with wind energy. But in the end, it's what we do. For example, in our models, we have what we call learning curves. So in this case, you see, and the solar panel is a textbook example where you already saw that. You see the technology efficiency, you see what we call the gap that we need to bridge, and you can measure it. And when we have models with kind of new technologies, we also want, if you compare something with traditional technology, that's wrong comparison, because if you have an emerging new technology in energy, for example, then you should also try to estimate the potential learning, and so that's what we try to do, and then you make a correct comparison. Otherwise, some technologies will never, they will never invest from an R&D perspective in that, because they say, it's never competitive. But if you take into account this kind of learning curves, it can be competitive. I must say that often scientists, and that's good, they're often too optimistic. And then we as economists, and then we come into play, and then we say, but if you look at the current market and you look into kind of the forecasts, price forecasts, the technology, the learning, then it will be still a challenge. And that's what this kind of techno-sustainability assessments and what we call prospective, so into the future, this is very nice to do. And it's not to, what we mainly, our goal is to see how we can then support the R&D process, to see how we can see, okay, look, let's work on the efficiency of that component. and not as so. If you see a system, that's what we try to do. To say, okay, for example, if you have material efficiency, you have energy efficiency, we try to build models to at least to support R&D, so that from an economic and environmental perspective, that they know if we work on this component of that technology, we can improve our economic performance, we can decrease our environmental impact, and then we try to support the R&D process with our models on that regard.
Do you have some great examples of or maybe like a top 3 of technologies that you are currently tracking, where you think this is something where we should put more investments into, because the potential impact, the potential positive impact could be tremendous if we invest maybe a little bit more in the learning curves?
That's too dangerous to answer as an economist. So, but I will give you some.
Why is it dangerous?
Yeah, because in the end, this is because I'll give examples, and there are a lot of interesting routes, and I will give the key example of that I do not see as a winning champion, but I can be wrong, and then people will say, remember.
Right.
And one of them is nuclear fusion. That was already announced 50, 60 years ago as the energy solution, and they're still investing a lot of money in that. And it's potentially there is some evolution, but let's see. And so we should be, in that regard, we should be careful. But if you look at what kind of trends that I see in the energy market, I think the digitalization, the fact that and that's more than the digital meters that we all will have, and there we will have a huge potential. What I mean with that is the fact that we already have some decades ago we had large energy plants. Then we moved to a kind of decentral situation where we have windmills and solar panels, and with the issue, of course, that we are dependent of sun and wind, and that we need a lot of backup, and that the demand and supply of the energy should be equal. And that was the major issue. The fact that we have no blackouts is the fact that we have a kind of robust system, or not a lot of blackouts, but that we have a robust system, but that we also are able to, if there is a lot of demand of electricity, that we are able to push immediately the additional supply. And but that's quite expensive. And the fact that we will have digital tools to meet to what we call peak shaving, and there are a lot of positive experiments, and that people in the end will be able not to only charge their car, but also to have kind of use the batteries of cars in the future to put the energy into their house. This kind of evolutions are happening, and then you can also use the AI and all these kind of tools that will make it, what in my opinion will really, it will save us money. That's quite difficult, because I do not believe that energy will be that cheap, but in the end it will deliver a lot of utilities in our house. We will improve our way of living there, and the system, the energy system, will be even more robust, or put it differently, will be worldwide as robust as we have it today, because in other continents it's not like that.
Not even in other countries. I have a friend who lives in Portugal.
Yeah,
for the last 6 months he needed to move from one house to another, because the electricity was just gone.
No, and so this is a kind of things that in Flanders people are, they even do not question that anymore. And in the end, and of course people can complain about the energy bill and the energy prices, that in the end it's more expensive, and it's the same with water, by the way. But in the end we have a kind of we have nice utilities. And I believe that with this kind of technological innovations, we can keep that level and even and even have even more tools, so that we should not think ourselves. If you have solar panels and an electric car, in the end, if you have to program and think, oh no, I should do it now and this and that, people will not do it that. But if you have a kind of smart software who's doing that for us, taking into account the system perspective, that's one of the things I believe that's within reach in a few years. So that's one evolution. I will give another example of studies that we did. So we did some studies on that one. Is the recycling and plastic recycling, because there one of the things you can, and there are smart people working on technologies that think about, okay, we have plastic, we have to reduce maybe some plastic use, but we also should acknowledge that it gives a lot of benefits. And also there, some people will already be angry because I'm saying that, but I really believe in the fact that then we should think about the one-use plastics and reduce that in the environment, but also keep on using plastics, but then think about how can we recycle it in a good way. And we are smart people developing these technologies, thinking about chemical recycling, where we really go to the basic components of new plastics. The thing is, and that's what we research, and we did it already 5-6 years ago, and we observe what we predicted also now today is the fact that these markets, they are very close connected to the fossil markets, meaning that if oil and gas is cheap, it's the profitability or the performance of recycling is way too low. And in the end, we were investing in a lot of capacity, and you see that people are now hesitant. And that's what we as environmental economists say, then in the end, then we need robust governance. A governance at European level says, okay, we really want that. But it's challenging now, because if we only do that in Europe, and that's the same with climate change, then we see, and that's also something that we forget. And we are only small continent, an old-fashioned small continent, and now, thanks to this kind of terrible things that's happening in the East and in the West, we suddenly realize that what we believe and think, and then I talk from values to economic systems, and the way how we deal with that is apparently different than in other parts of the world, making that then you feel the pressure towards kind of sustainability ignorance also within Europe, and that's dangerous. But luckily also a lot of people and companies thinking, no, we should even do more and invest more, because in the end, in the long run, it will be the good way to do that. But then you should be, at this moment, you should be a very kind of stubborn entrepreneur.
Yeah, I don't know, something that I've been tracking with a lot of interest lately is, you mentioned the East. In China, the amount of increase in solar panels and the amount of energy production, it's fascinating to track from a distance. Like it's just going exponential.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that the cost of electricity in Europe, we already, you say we're already less competitive than America. And if you then look to what's coming from the East, I'm very curious how that's going to evolve. Because our industry they already have issues. There's this tension, this tension between trying to do what's good for the planet, for ourselves on the long term, and then indeed seeing that other countries, other societies are more focused on the short term.
But in the end, that's completely true. So the energy component is an issue from an industrial perspective. If you look for example, to China, they are luckily also investing in renewable energy, but also they're also opening new coal plants and gas. So they're doing everything, increasing. But of course, we often forget that they are nearly triple the size of full Europe, meaning that and they're lagging behind. So in the end, so they do not have the energy system as we have it today in Europe. So they need to have full investing, also knowing that they are also the factory of the world. So they need a lot of energy, and we're still buying their stuff. So that's what we do. Is that an issue? I believe in, and that's maybe a little bit strange, because a lot of sustainability scientists do not believe in markets, and then they say we need we need to do it totally differently and not using this kind of market system. I believe in markets, and if we talk about more or less market, I always say we need better markets. We need to see how we can build them, how we can correct them for market failures. Externalities is our key focus as environmental economists. At the moment, in fact, that's even not the main concern, because it's market power that's the main concern. If we have the Magnificent Seven and this kind of companies, if they can dominate certain markets, that's even more an issue. And also there you see a kind of movement that we, instead of, as a government, instead of kind of guarantee that there is no market power. So because market power means markups and consumers paying too much and excessive profits for certain companies. And you can then say, yeah, but these profits are invested in new technologies, and that's good. Yeah, okay, but there are some limits there. So this is also a huge discussion. But I believe in the fact that we can design markets, and that and often economists, I feel that like they're not taking the effort, and especially not in the sustainability scientific community, to explain the benefits of good functioning markets. And
is a good functioning market an open market, or what is it?
It's an open market. An open market where you have, but of course, open market means there is trade, and you try to do that in a correct way, meaning the more trade you have, the more welfare you have. But of course, you should balance and you should make agreements. If you trade with and you import goods based on a production process where you use a lot of fossil fuels, or you use a lot of pesticides, for example, then you should try to negotiate and to see how can we correct for that. And you can, and that's the trade-off and the challenge, of course. And about food is a good example, because it's not only about safety, because that's what we can test, but also how did we come to that, and do we need and then we go to kind of, was that produced based on cutting forests and rainforests? Then maybe we should be kind of correct for that in our negotiations of trade agreements. But trade is beneficial. But we should not ignore the fact that you always have people who try to circumvent the way how we produce in a sustainable way, and that's the issue where we can, for example, have trade barriers. But then we should not abuse them as is currently happening for power. That's what's happening today.
What's your opinion about carbon credits?
I'm in favor of carbon credits.
Why don't we have a well-functioning system yet? It seems I think it could solve so much.
Yeah, because that's the reason is because you need it at a global level. So if you look into the climate change, challenge, let's call it that, and global warming, it's global. It's what we call a global externality making, and the reason is that if you emit CO2 in China or in Australia or in Belgium, it does not matter where it's, because it goes into an atmosphere and it results in global warming. It's not exactly, but in the end, that's the case. But that makes that it's a global external cost. And if we do our efforts and they're not doing that somewhere else, then the global warming is still there.
And if we have Europe, as Europe, because I think we're still one of the biggest, if not the biggest market in the world, consumption-wise, outside of the US, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. We are that's one of the arguments.
So if we do it, then can't we push it to the...
But that's what we friendly try to do that. And that was quite successful in the way, if you look into even China, but mainly with Japan and this. But if you then have the US blocking this, then you quickly see how difficult it is, and but also Russia, for example. So it's one of the and this context at this moment it's even more difficult than it was before. But even within, because that we often forget that we think in Europe we are the best in class, but even within Europe you see differences, and you see kind of countries. And I will ignore the Belgian situation because it's often too sensitive. But you see also countries who have a different point of view, and using the same arguments worldwide, referring to historical debts, referring to kind of what's happened before, ignoring numbers, and then you see, and that takes time. If you look into Poland, Poland was one of the kind of countries making it very difficult to have one European voice on climate policy. But in the end, it's still a difficult partner, but you see that Poland is doing well economically. And then in the end, you see them moving, and that's great. And that's a good opportunity. But what you also saw, and that's one of the kind of, but that's more economic, political economy, that, for example, the UK, they of course there was the Brexit and they are not part of the European Union, but they also felt like if you look from a climate policy perspective, the UK was kind of trying to do a good job, and they made agreements, while the French, for example, they really like to push, so you can talk and you can realize and act. And there was also kind of, with those kind of plans, some countries who try to do a good job, they also felt afterwards like but the others are kind of lagging behind and not doing the efforts they can do or need to do. And that also made it, and that was already at European level. And if you do that on a global level, it makes it so difficult. But nevertheless, now I'm quite pessimistic. But nevertheless, I think if you invest in technology, for example, and societal innovations, then it will be easier. If we make kind of progress on that regard, it will be easier. And if you feel like if you develop tools and smart metering and you go to kind of, and there will be some technologies popping up, then it will be easier. But it's not that I'm too optimistic, but let's, in the end, and there you see investments worldwide. And that's because we can blame the US, but the US is still, now it's a little bit different, but they're still leading in the R&D part. And also in China, they are doing a lot of on battery technology. They're leading the way. So that's good. So that's the optimistic part, that they're also doing their job because they can earn money, and and it can be a solution. So that's the positive note.
Do you see technological breakthroughs coming for the I lost the word again. Stickstoff from
Nitrogen.
From the nitrogen for the farmers. Are there any breakthroughs that you see coming up in the next couple of years on that front?
Yeah, I should refer to some colleagues for that. Very dangerous. So I will not. Yes. So there are solutions, and there will be on manure treatment. There will be kind of the need of testing solutions, because often you also should allow, as policymakers, to test for solutions and to what we call kind of low regulation zones, where you can also see, because if you fail, you should be allowed to fail. And I think there will be solutions, but not only what I call end of pipe solutions, because you have, for example, nitrogen. In the end, they are experimenting with, okay, we have nitrogen and we should treat manure and we should use that as a source, and then we can find good applications for that. That's good, and we need to do that. But that's end of pipe. You have the pollution, and at the end we will solve that. But you also have other ways, and you should also realize that if you look in the agricultural sectors, nitrogen is of course linked to animal farming, and if you have animals, we produce animal products. And it's not only the nitrogen issue, it's also if we reduce our animal production and animal consumption of animal products, we will improve our health, and we also have less climate emissions. So this kind of co-benefits, what we call them, they're also interesting. So it's kind of also there we need kind of investments to learn people, and that's also progressing. So you see also the age differences, and that's one of the major efforts. If you go now nearly anywhere in Europe, you see vegan, vegetarian options, or you see kind of another kind of way of meat consumption. And is it perfect? Certainly not. But yeah, that's something you can. That's also kind of social innovation, that you have this kind of shift, and that can be from in very different ways. And I'm sure that some people, depending on the age, it's easier. And for me, it's I try to consume less meat, but I call myself a failed vegetarian, and it's not that easy. But it's easier when you're younger. Maybe I'm just blaming, and it's then an excuse. But in the end, you see that because when there are not now more options than there were before, and it's like my grandparents who had with potatoes, and they were not eating rice or pasta and this kind of stuff. So there are trends, and you see change, and that's good. So that's also important. So not only from the production side, but also linking that to consumption, and then you can make progress. But, yeah.
Do you have like, you're part of you're the spokesperson of the EnvEcon.
Yeah.
EnvEcon?
Yeah, and it's
environmental
just short
economy
for environmental economics. Yeah,
for the Environmental Economics Research Group, you work with teams on sustainability assessments in technologies, food systems, as you just explained, energy, the circular economy. Maybe as we are starting to work our way towards a close, and we want to finish on a light and positive note, do you have a couple of, or maybe just one, great projects that you were able to work on with the university that you think, damn, that was great, great thing that we did there?
So I will mention some, and that's always dangerous, because then not mentioning others, and we have a very, very interesting group of people, and I learned by answering this kind of question, and that I always disappoint people working on other projects that you do not mention that, and so it's not important. So that's certainly not the case. We have a large number of ongoing projects, very different ones. One of the things I want to mention, although it's maybe a little bit strange, is the fact we work on a lot of projects on climate change adaptation. And you can think, should we adapt? Yes, we should adapt. And I think we have projects in Africa, we have projects in Europe, a large European project, to facilitate communities, cities in Europe, but also local communities in Africa, to really kind of calculate how to invest in climate change adaptation, and because it will, in the end, it will be a profitable, and that's annoying, but it will be a profitable investment, because if you're not doing that, yeah, because of course it would have been better 20 years ago that we were able to mitigate. And in fact, 10 years ago, when we started about doing research on climate change adaptation, people were saying you should not do that because then you surrender. But now it's time in that case, it's not time to surrender, but it's time to have this kind of projects, and it's different than just building higher dikes. It's about nature smart solutions, and to think about how to cope with that. And for example, we have a tool developed, and that's one of the most applied project to support local cities, and especially the smaller communities and municipalities, to look for, instead of grain investment, to have additional sewer capacity and this kind of traditional investments, to also look for more green infrastructure, and to also calculate that. If you have green infrastructure, it can be a little bit more expensive, but then maybe you can save other costs on the longer term, and we calculated that.
What's a good example of green infrastructure?
Yeah, it can be from regular trees in streets, but it can also the traditional wadis, what you call that. These kind of things are not that. It's not that it's just an excuse to do something, but it really can be beneficial. Because it can capture water, so the technologies are there, and they were there. Also, green roofs, another example. But then, if some people want to invest, and especially at community level or municipality level, it was often like, but they're a little bit more expensive, and they need or even cheaper, but they need arguments in euros. To explain, but you can and should do this, and this is what we can do and offered in tools to support this kind of decision makers, and often people at the municipality level who are willing to do that, but they had to convince the major and to say, but let's do this, and it's beneficial. So
if someone's listening and they want to use these tools,
they are on our website of the university. So we have.
I will put them in the show notes. If you send them to me, I
will do that. So this was just one project, and that's the same with models, but they are not on our website. On what we call the when you have technologies, what we often try to do is it's still in the R&D phase, and to support. And for example, I already mentioned them for plastic recycling, for example, and that's one case, but we do the same for carbon capture and utilization projects. And you have a technology, and you're just developing that in the lab, or even already kind of in a first demonstration phase. But then you should estimate the economic potential, but also the environmental potential. And then we try to also balance that, and we can try to translate the environmental potential, for example, and CO2 is one of the easiest way, because you can have carbon price, and you can say this is the carbon. If there was a good functioning carbon credit system, it would have this. We can translate that and we can say, that's 50 euros or 80 euros per ton CO2 saved, and that's the value. And that's what we try to link in this kind of potential investments for emerging technologies. And that's another thing. I'm also happy because our group, we are also trying to contribute in other things. For example, and we have a change maker of the TED, a newspaper, and there we also screen projects of companies, and where in to see, it's a celebration of companies wanting to change, to contribute. And then we, as a research group, and it's also interesting for a researcher, senior researchers, to be confronted and also to see what's happening and what all those companies doing and not doing. So that's kind of bringing them to reality, but also seeing what's really out there also. So this kind of linkages are very, very nice to see.
Great. We are approaching the end. The hour is almost past. And we can have a tradition at the Bao Podcast to finish with a couple more personal questions.
Shoot.
So one of the ones we usually ask is if you could have a drink with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Yeah. That's a very intriguing question, and I would certainly choose for someone who is dead, because that's even more intriguing. That can, if that would have been possible. And linking to the whole story that I was telling, I would go for Thomas Malthus. And that
never heard of the guy.
But maybe you will, depending. Some people will, because that's someone who lived 200 years ago. Malthus, and he was an economist, an early economist, a traditional one, and he had a model saying, you have food production, and we can increase food production, but in the end we start with having the best lands, and then if you have more people, we should use marginal land to produce food. But then we all know that population growth is exponential. So if you have, and that's for sure. So in his early models, he said, we go to kind of hunger, disaster, and he was, and that's population economics and population growth. And why is that interesting? Because 200 years ago, it was the start of the, it was in England, and he was famous for being wrong. Because they say, and why? Because he ignored technological innovation, he ignored increased productivity, and of course also transitions of people, birth control, the fact that more educated people are less kids, and this kind of things, and the sustained economic growth was ignored. But and now why I like him, not to confront him with his mistakes, because you have a lot of people and that's what we teach in basic economic courses. We say, he was wrong. But in our environmental economic course, we say, he was wrong, but he had a point. Because he was one of the first to say, we have resource constraints. We have the issue of sustainability. So I see him, but I'm never sure if I could talk to him, I would wonder if he really realized that he was one of the first to realize that there are sustainability issues, and he was a kind of drama guy, but in the end, it's quite interesting to see that he was one of the first to have, there will be environmental consequences, and the trade-off was implicitly there. So that was that person.
Great answer.
And another personal note, his name was Thomas, and I have a son and a daughter, but my son is also named Thomas. But that was not the reason, because my wife will blame me if I mention that was the reason. And that's certainly not the case, but it's a coincidence that I like to mention here.
I think he must have been quite surprised if you would be able to talk with him to say, we didn't go exponential, but we are with 8 billion people.
The population growth was exponential, so that was right. But the thing is, it was the the marginal gain of food production was different. We had, and there's the same story in India with the famous Green Revolution. So the people were not starving. Of course, there were always periods of starving people, and that's terrible. But in the end, due to in the 50s and the introduction of technologies and also pesticides and this kind of fertilizers, we were able to tackle the population.
It reminds me, there's like this list. I found this website a couple of years ago with the 25 most consequential scientists ever from a positive perspective. And I think number 1 was like this German scientist who developed the process to make fertilizer. I forgot what his name was, but he saved, like, indirectly, they said, like, more than 1.5 billion lives or something.
Indeed.
Final question. Is there a book that you've read recently, or not recently, that you strongly would recommend to our listeners? And if so, why?
I will do it a little bit strange. I read a book because I was in a panel with someone, and I totally disagree, but it's very interesting to mention it. So it's strange. I will recommend a book because I recommend a book to read it, and then hopefully disagree as I do. And it's because it's quite interesting. It's called Voorbij Duurzaamheid, Beyond Sustainability, of Shivant Yagru, and he claims that the full sustainability issue is a kind of neo-colonial economic fantasy. So and it's a kind of way to suppress people. So this kind of, it's very strange because I was in that panel and I was kind of trying to explain the benefits of to have correct markets and to tackle these challenges with technological innovation. But I was also surprised that a lot of people, they really like to think about kind of, but this what we're living in our world, it should be totally different and we should live like an isolated island and this kind of things. So that's a very intriguing book. But maybe, that's maybe I was reading that book. But maybe if I had, because it's also a non-fiction book. If I like to mention a fiction book, I would like to mention Grand Hotel Europa from Ilya Leonard Pfeiffer, because it's also linked to things that we said. There is a love story in there. It's fiction, but it links like it's happening in Venice, and Venice is described as an open museum. And the Dutch writer makes it like, but in fact, he links it to mass tourism, the unsustainability of that, and the fact that as Europe, we are the old continent, and in the end, we will be a kind of open museum, while all the other interesting things are happening somewhere else. And we are kind of an open museum, and he points to that, and if you see that fiction description, you will see that, and when you're traveling around in Europe and you see the tourists coming to visit Bruges, and this kind of you think maybe, and then linked to that discussion about while we consuming a lot, but in the end, what is our contribution worldwide, and in that sustainability, are we still that living, changing, impressive continent? Certainly not. And that's very intriguing. Linked to that love story, of course.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Steven, I would like to thank you very much for joining. I think it's really, really interesting, the work that you do. I think I could talk for many more hours with you, but we are strictly limited to one.
It's possible already too long.
Yeah.
So sorry for that, listeners. It's too long.
But thank you very much for making time in your very busy schedule. I hope the work that you do with the university can can continue to have the positive impact that it does. And thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Bao Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to our channel. If you're interested in Bao Living in our Smart Adaptable Module or SAM, go check out our website baoliving.com. If you want to stay up to date, you can best subscribe to our monthly newsletter on our website or follow us on all social media platforms where we're named @Bao Living.